The #1 cause of preventable death after injury is blood loss. Rapides Regional Trauma Center is recognizing National Stop the Bleed Day today by conducting multiple free hands-on Stop the Bleeding training for the community. According to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, a person who is bleeding can die from blood loss within 5 minutes.
So the main reason that trauma patients have complications or die is from hemorrhage or bleeding to death. And so this is a very basic way that we can start treating the patients before they ever arrive at the trauma center. Calling 911, applying pressure, packing the wound, and then lastly, a tourniquet type device. You can also do these things to yourself if you were alone and this happened. Rapides Regional is the trauma center, is the only trauma center in this area, so we want to always provide injury prevention education.
During the training, participants learned 3 techniques: how to use your hands to apply pressure to a wound, how to pack a wound to control bleeding, and how to correctly apply a tourniquet. Learning how to stabilize a bleeding victim and apply a tourniquet could help save a life.